enters the discussion, apparently as a synonym for the inexplicable. Can it be that divine providence has guided Johann Grander in hitting the bullseye and shaking the very roots of physics? For despite his modest academic prowess, he does possess some of the most important characteristics of a good physicist. He was curious and playful his whole life long. The old man and his ideas represent the no man's land between science and pseudoscience, where so many fruitful thoughts lie buried, and at least as many illusions and wrong tracks as well. In Johann Grander's case, clues have been accumulating of late that revitalized water is more than just a creed. Indeed, there is also proof. It comes from a venerable institute in the Technical University of Graz in Austria. Here one has taken water from various sources, analyzed it according to scientific standards, and compared it to Grander's water. The results showed no differences, but for one single exception, and it is absolutely sensational. The revitalization process had apparently programmed the Grander water to reduce the surface tension by up to 17% compared to all the other waters tested, regardless of temperature. The head of the institute has no doubts about the physical and chemical explanations for this phenomenon. Since publishing the study, he has been swamped with inquiries and attacked by many colleagues to boot.
Ich möchte mich nur auf dieser Ebene bewegen, dass ich sagen kann, das, was für mich messbar ist.
I'd like to stick to my principle that I can believe something that is measurable. I would shun everything else emphatically. I am too much of a technologist to risk my neck.
Von der Wasserchemie einfach zu wenig verstehe.
Many of the revitalized water's effects remain a mystery, but one will be obliged to think again.
Ich muss das Kind anders nennen, weil ich plötzlich ein Wasser habe.
I'll have to rechristen the child because suddenly I've got one water that's called water and another that's also called water and only active in parentheses. We all know water as H2O and that's all. So it means we'll have to bring in a new concept.
Einen anderen Begriff wahrscheinlich sogar einführen.
Basically, the idea of water having a memory has been plaguing science for centuries. Above all, with the lessons of homeopathy, which is based on the assumption that water is capable of remembering certain active agents. Homeopathic medicines are so radically diluted that, taken statistically, no single dose can possibly contain a solitary active agent molecule. Nevertheless, the healing effect of the agent appears to be retained because the water remembers it. In Germany alone, some 4,000 doctors treat and heal with medicines that are produced on the strength of this memory effect, which, according to physics, shouldn't really exist. All current attempts to prove the phenomenon have ended in disaster.
Scientifically, it is hard to understand, if not impossible to understand, with what we know at the moment, how something that is so dilute could possibly have any effect. And I've yet to see any suggestion that is credible and that has stood up to testing that it can work. So in that sense, I'm very, very skeptical.
Animals are regarded with less suspicion when it comes to pseudoscientific effects. Homeopathic medicines also work on animals, who care not a hoot about scientific disputes. Their owners, too, who pay for the treatment after all, are relatively uninfluenced. Had the treatment of their darling pets with homeopathy not worked, then that side of medicine would have gone broke long ago.
Geimpft ist er? Geimpft ist er, ja. Die Impfungen machen wir regelmäßig.
The Austrian veterinary doctor Peter Knafel has specialized in homeopathy for more than 10 years, with continuing success. Many animals, already written off by their owners, recovered under his treatment. This is confirmed in countless studies, but which is redundant in practice.
Ob es wissenschaftlich ist oder nicht, spielt für mich persönlich.
I don't care whether it's scientifically proved or not. My only concern is whether it works. And day after day in my practice, I witness success. So proving homeopathy is not so important.
My advice is don't believe it. Because if you look at the way water behaves and everything we know about the molecular behavior of water, it's very, very hard to see how water could have a memory without dissolved substances. So my advice is don't believe it.
So how should the man in the street orientate himself in this no man's land between faith and science? Ignore everything that science considers poppycock? This would be very difficult for some. As here, for instance, in the tiny village of St. Marijn in the Alps, where the bells proclaim a physical mystery. Prior to its restoration, this 900-year-old church was plagued by rising damp, so damp that the sandstone walls gradually became mouldy. In fact, one could say that the walls positively soaked up the water. Today there is no longer any sign of this. Only a few years ago, Holy Mass was celebrated in 90% humidity. Now, it's as dry as a cardboard box factory. Responsible for the miracle is a nondescript appliance that works without electricity and which, according to its maker, calls on energy that finds no mention in books on physics. It's quite an absurd construction that nevertheless has undoubtedly reduced the dampness in the church by a third within the space of a few months.
Naja, ich bin kein Anhänger der Esoterik.
I'm no New Age enthusiast and no physics expert either. So I'm a layman in both subjects, I'm afraid. But at all events, it's already been proved that there is much that physics and orthodox medicine have not been able to prove, and that there are more things between heaven and earth than we can weigh and measure and so determine. So I'm convinced that no one has a monopoly in this matter, that there can be various ways to approach it.
Dass es verschiedene Zugänge und Wege geben kann.
Following the course of this startling invention quickly brings us to the venerable monastery at Klosterneuburg, near Vienna. Here too, one had long done battle with dripping walls, most especially in one very old cellar that one wanted to convert to a vinothek. Today, the only damp thing in Klosterneuburg's vinothek is the wine. The walls are dry, and again, hanging well disguised from the ceiling, we find a mysterious device. It was much cheaper than all the other methods on offer, but was nonetheless viewed with mistrust for some time. We drilled the walls, we tested everything in the walls and so on, and it works. I'm quite convinced that it works. As a result of the success we've had here, which is palpable after all, it stood all the dampness tests, we have used the same method on 3 other projects, and it works there too. Apparently the device is able to manipulate the dampness so that it retreats into the earth. How does its inventor explain this phenomenon?
So, das ist dieser neuartige Generatortyp, der in diesem Weinfass.
So, that's the newfangled generator type that is built into a wine barrel and protected by it. Basically, the generator type is made up of a receiving antenna that receives the ground energy. The incoming energy is then polarized, that is, it's made dextro-rotatory and put through the transmitting unit, on top of which the so-called cosmic energy flows in from above, and that strengthens the whole system.
Die sogenannte Raumenergie ein, die das ganze System in seiner Wirkung verstärkt.
Science or not, Wilhelm Mohorn has already sold 26,000 appliances and points to a band of exclusively happy customers. Is there still more out there than our book learning ever dreamed of? New miraculous effects make the participants euphoric and therefore blind when it comes to objections. In such cases, it is advisable to accept defeat honorably. A practical example from Moscow. Johannes Koppensteiner, who makes international contacts for Johann Granda and his revitalized water, also loves to launch daring experiments. In his Moscow hotel room, he places 2 little bottles with radioactive water beside 1 bottle of Granda revitalized water. Will the mere vicinity of the Granda water suffice to reduce the contamination overnight? Next day, his first call is at the university. Koppensteiner is full of optimism, and not without reason. A short while ago here in Moscow, scientists watched small amounts of radioactive polluted water being put through the mysterious Granda revitalizer, and it appeared that the rays had indeed been reduced. He's arrived, the Institute for Radiochemistry at the Moscow Lomonosov University. An undertaking like this is in no way an everyday occurrence for the scientist. Koppensteiner is a layman after all, and the experiment is anything but ordinary. Yuri Sapochnikov, head of the Venerable Institute, has left himself plenty of time and instructed several of his young students to apply themselves to the problem.
When I told him about experiments that had been carried out in other institutes, he really said, no, this is not possible. But he told me, I've been doing, research work, with radiochemistry now for almost 40 years. I have never heard, that something could reduce radioactivity. So somehow, I think it was, the personal sympathy we felt for each other. He said, okay, give it a try.
The result of the test is just as most physicists would have expected. No reaction. Contrary to similar tests, the radioactive rays in the bottles have not diminished. Was the test too absurd? Did Koppensteiner expect a miracle?
Miracle, for me, is something, that happens beyond our understanding. That doesn't mean that it's in reality a miracle. Miracles always have, reasons. There's always a cause for the effect. Miracles are just an indication that we do not understand all. From a broader perspective, most likely, miracles are something, quite normal and just belonging to some other laws and conditions.
Some people will begin to think that our research borders on fraud, I'm afraid. But the time will soon come in which new parameters are introduced. Then everything will be in place, and scientists will be able to check our findings and also the relevant technology. Investigating the inner order of water, its memory, and the influence of the heavens, one inevitably comes across the quintessential myth, the snowflake. Do these artworks of nature store information in their bizarre forms? Do they bring messages from heaven to earth? Each year, sextillions of snowflakes fall from the clouds, and each crystal is unique.